Hi everyone, it's Emma here, and this week my topic to discuss is why has my period suddenly stopped? So I think the obvious one to consider would be pregnancy. However, we know beyond that there are many reasons that you can miss a period or your periods can stop, and this is just something that I want to run over with you. We're trying to help you to understand what's going on with your body, what's going on with your hormones, and why your symptoms as a result may be arising. So we just want to talk through some of those mechanisms with you. So when we talk about irregular periods, this can mean a number of things. So first of all, your periods could be irregular month to month. So that means that your cycle can vary month to month, and I think technically you would be considered having irregular periods if your cycle typically varies by more than 7 days on a monthly basis. So that's one thing to consider. You might think that you've missed a period, but then it shows up in a few days. Another scenario would be if you have what's not considered irregular, so a shorter or a longer cycle, so less than 28 days, say 24 days, something like that, or a longer cycle, so less frequently than every 28 days, so perhaps every 32 or 35 days, for example. So you're not considered technically regular, but for you, you have a regular cycle. It just varies from that typical normal cycle that you would read about in textbooks. But of course we know that women are individual and they can have slight variations in their hormones that can contribute to these different cycles. So that would be something to consider as well, if you're regular but your cycle is a slightly different length. So keeping those scenarios in mind, we are then just going to talk through some of the potential mechanisms that could be contributing to those symptoms. So a couple of points we're going to start talking about is differences in body weight, and we know this can quite directly affect your cycle. So one of the first areas I want to touch on is weight gain, and this can impact your cycle due to the influence it can have on our sex hormones. So again, this could be quite irregular, a regular change in your cycle that's normal for you, or it could be a little bit irregular and changing each month in terms of your cycle. So there's a few situations. First of all, what I would say is that as we increase adipose tissue, which is our fat cells, these can actually harbour excess hormones such as estrogen. So potentially over time, if we have gained weight, this could potentially put us into the estrogen dominant category, and this can typically result in kind of shorter cycles, so more frequent periods, potentially heavier bleeds. So that is just one way to consider how excess adipose tissue could potentially influence your hormones. One other situation is over time, excess weight gain can be often connected to irregular blood sugar levels, which can affect insulin resistance, and this can also have an influence then on our sex hormones. So this would be a scenario similar to what can often happen in PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. So that's just one to consider, because that can actually go the other way, in that our periods can become a little bit less frequent on the whole, although it's individual. So this is just another way how weight gain could potentially affect our symptoms. So in that scenario, the blood sugar regulation would be the main area to focus on, of course, as well as the weight control overall. So that's just explaining a little bit about how weight gain could potentially affect your symptoms. But it's just something to note that in this situation, we would be looking at diet and lifestyle measures first, rather than directly targeting the hormones, if you like. So it's just about considering potentially the root cause of some of your symptoms. Then on the other hand, we also have weight loss as well. Again, just one to consider. And in the same way, if we have less adipose tissue or we lose adipose tissue over time, that's a source of estrogen that we then lose, and we could potentially go the other way and be low estrogen. And typically low estrogen is associated with longer cycles, so less frequent periods, and that could be linked to your weight in that respect. So again, it's just one to consider in terms of why your cycle might have changed, or why you missed a period, or your periods are becoming less frequent, or changing in the frequency that you've been used to. Next up, also what I should say just on the weight loss, one is that it can happen if we lose weight quite quickly. So if anyone needs any advice on how to control their weight gradually, we would always recommend gradual changes in lifestyle rather than any rapid changes. So feel free to get in touch if you've got any questions around that. The next top point on my list is stress. So stress can also influence your symptoms for a number of reasons. First of all, stress could influence changes in body weight, as we've described, in terms of people gaining weight or losing weight, and stress could actually be an underlying factor in all of that. Then separately, stress itself can influence our sex hormones, and this is a kind of evolutionary process in that when our stress levels are quite dominant, our stress hormones are active, our sex hormones can potentially take a hit. And that's a bit of a protective mechanism in that when we're stressed, your body often doesn't see your reproductive functions as being priority. And that again is just a protective mechanism that your body doesn't prioritise reproductive functions in times of stress. So that's just one to consider. Again, a really prevalent underlying factor. That is just one to consider. Again, if this is the case and stress is likely to be underlying, we would probably be looking to target that first rather than directly on those sex hormones. So something like our stress relief daytime containing herbs such as valerian and hops would be one to consider rather than those hormone influencing herbs, for example. Obviously together with stress management techniques and other things, trying to figure out the root cause of the stress and potentially how you as an individual could manage that. Next on my list is excessive exercise. So again, it kind of links in with some of the themes that we've already mentioned. So excessive or very high intensity exercise can actually ignite your stress response. So just similar to what we've described, that puts your body in a state of stress and reproductive functions may not be priority. Also, potentially excessive exercise could be linked to weight loss or changes in weight, as we've already described as well. So again, that would just be one to consider, and perhaps just trying to make that a little less intense, or switching in some other kind of calming exercises such as your Pilates or your stretching, just to kind of balance the stress and the de-stressing benefits of exercise. So again, just one to consider. Next on my list is contraceptives. So this is one that in some cases women might not be aware of, but depending on the type of contraceptives that you're on, so particularly the progesterone dominant contraceptives, so that would be the mini pill, the implant, the injection, the patch, the Mirena coil. These especially can cause your periods to become less frequent and potentially stop altogether over time. So that's just one to consider. If your periods have stopped or become less frequent, just to consider if you're on any hormonal medications and if this is in fact just an effect of those. Finally, I just want to touch on menopause as well. So menopause by definition is the last ever menstrual period, but of course at the time it's quite hard to know that that's your last ever one until perhaps a year or two have passed and that becomes more obvious. The menopause on average tends to take place between the age of 45 and 55. But in the lead up to the menopause, the last of our period, that period of perimenopause, it's often the case that you will miss periods, they will become less regular, the frequency will most likely change for a lot of women. So again, that could be something that could be contributing to you missing a period or having changes in frequency. So in the lead up to menopause, during this perimenopause period, something like our menopause support could be helpful. So that's especially if you're experiencing any symptoms relating to menopause. If it's just changes in your cycle and you're quite happy with that and you don't have many other symptoms, then you might not even need to take anything. But otherwise, if there's symptoms, the menopause support containing your fermented soy isoflavones may be an option for you as well. As with some of the other lifestyle habits we've mentioned, would also apply in terms of changes in weight, exercise, stress management and things. Those would all be helpful as well. So hopefully that has been useful for you this week. Please do subscribe to our Avogo YouTube channel if you haven't done already, and also please hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of any of my new weekly videos. Thanks.